All right, get ready because today we're diving headfirst into a real global power struggle.
Oh, this is going to be good.
It is. We're talking about the Panama Canal,
Right.
which has become like a major flashpoint between the U.S. and China.
Yeah, you can really see it.
You can. It's playing out in real time, and we've
Mm.
got a whole bunch of reports and analyses to dig into.
It's to be like watching a chess match, a really high stakes one.
Exactly, exactly. And what's so interesting is how this local dispute over a port contract
Yeah.
has become like this huge international incident.
It's wild how that happens, right? One little thing and boom, it's global.
It really is.
Yeah.
And the company at the center of it all is called Hutchison Ports.
Okay.
They operate two major ports in the Panama Canal,
Oh.
Balboa and Cristobal.
Got it.
And what really caught my attention was the connection to this billionaire Li Ka-shing.
Oh, yeah, I saw that too. From Hong Kong, right?
Exactly. And he's got these close ties
Mhm.
to the Chinese Communist Party.
See, that connection to Li Ka-shing is huge. It's like the key to understanding what the U.S. is doing.
So they're targeting individuals like him.
Yeah, and the companies they see as tools of Chinese influence.
And that's a pretty big shift, isn't it? Like moving away from traditional diplomacy.
It is. It's a much more aggressive approach to countering China's ambitions, for sure.
Like they're trying to unravel a whole network.
Exactly.
But hold on, how did Hutchison Ports get so entrenched in the Panama Canal in the first place?
Well, it goes back to this contract from 1997.
Oh.
It gave them the rights to operate these ports.
So everything was above board back then.
Yeah, and that contract got automatically renewed in 2021 for another 25 years.
So what changed?
Well, the world has changed a lot since 97.
I'll say.
Right? China's influence has grown massively, and the U.S. sees them as a rival.
A major one.
Yeah, a major one. And the Panama Canal, because it's so strategically important for trade,
Right, it's a choke point.
it is. It's become this focal point in this whole U.S.-China rivalry.
So it's bigger than just one company or contract.
Way bigger. It's about the U.S. trying to push back against China's rising power.
And they're using multiple strategies to do it.
Right. We see political pressure, like Senator Marco Rubio.
He's been pretty vocal about this.
He has, urging Panama to reconsider the Hutchison Ports contract.
And then there's that lawsuit.
Oh, yeah, the legal battle.
Two Panamanian lawyers filed it with their Supreme Court,
What are they alleging?
saying Hutchison Ports has been involved in some shady stuff.
Like what?
Constitutional violations, tax evasion, the whole 9 yards.
Wow. That lawsuit is a prime example of the U.S. using legal means as a weapon.
So it's strategic.
Very strategic. It's a way to expose vulnerabilities, put pressure on China, and disrupt their plans.
And maybe hit them where it hurts.
Financially.
Exactly. The lawsuit wants to terminate the contract, which could mean big penalties for Hutchison Ports.
Makes sense. It sends a message that there are consequences for violating U.S. expectations.
But China's not just going to sit back and take it, are they?
No way. We're seeing reports of retaliation, like antitrust investigations into Google and Apple.
Ah, so classic tit for tat.
It is. Using their own tools to push back against the U.S. pressure.
Feels like both sides are playing a dangerous game, testing the limits.
They are. The stakes are incredibly high because the Panama Canal is crucial for global trade.
Any disruption there would affect everyone.
Yeah, it would ripple across the world. We're talking delays, higher prices, real consequences for everyone.
This could hit people's wallets.
Absolutely. And that's just the economic side. The bigger picture is even more significant.
How so?
We're witnessing a shift in global power, and this Panama Canal situation is like a mini version of that larger trend.
It's like this little strip of land has become a battleground for something much bigger.
Exactly. It's a fight over who controls the future.
And China's response, while strong, shows a weakness.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Their legal system doesn't have the same recognition as Western systems,
Right. It's not seen as legitimate in the same way.
which makes their retaliation less effective on the world stage.
It's like they're playing by different rules that nobody else recognizes.
Exactly. And this brings up a really important distinction.
What's that?
Land ownership versus management rights.
Okay, I'm listening. How does that apply here?
Well, China, through Hutchison Ports, can manage those ports in Panama,
Right.
but they don't own the land.
Ah, I see.
It's like when Britain managed the Suez Canal or Cyprus. They had control, not ownership,
So China's position in Panama might be weaker than it seems.
because they don't have that underlying ownership. Exactly.
And that vulnerability goes beyond Panama. It's relevant to their claims in the South China Sea, too.
Here, they also lack true ownership.
Right. It weakens their position if there's ever a legal challenge.
So they're building their global influence on shaky ground.
It seems that way. And the U.S. is playing the long game by focusing on the legal side of things.
Using international law to their advantage.
Exactly. Exposing vulnerabilities and challenging China's actions.
I know China's actions don't always follow the rules.
And they're using that to their advantage. And this actually brings us to a broader point about some flaws within China's system.
Okay, let's get into that.
These flaws are becoming more obvious as China tries to achieve its global ambitions, but they clash with how the international system works.
So what are some of these flaws you're talking about?
Well, one big issue is their economic fragility.
You mean despite their growth?
Yeah, while they've grown incredibly fast, it's been heavily reliant on exports and access to Western markets.
Right, they need those markets.
They do. And as tensions rise with the U.S., we're seeing things like tariffs and trade restrictions.
Which directly impacts their economy.
Exactly. And this Panama Canal situation could make that even worse. If the U.S. succeeds, it'll show other countries that China's hold on these strategic assets isn't as strong as it appears.
Like a domino effect.
Exactly. Other nations might think twice about making deals with China, knowing they could face similar challenges.
So what's China's end game here? What are they trying to achieve, and how are they adapting to this pushback?
That's the key question. It seems their strategy has been to secure control over key infrastructure, like ports.
To project their power.
Exactly. But as we've discussed, that strategy might be hitting a wall.
They're facing resistance.
They are, not just from the U.S., but potentially from others, too.
So their current model might be flawed.
It might be. And that raises the question, what are their alternatives? How can they adapt and still reach their goals?
That's the big question. What are their options?
One option is to shift their focus from just controlling things to actually owning them.
You mean owning strategic assets?
Exactly.
But that seems incredibly difficult. How could they actually buy ports and canals in other countries?
It would take a major change in their approach. They'd have to move away from their current model.
Which often involves those opaque deals and leveraging debt for influence.
Exactly. They'd need to be more transparent, accountable, play by international rules.
Basically a complete overhaul.
Pretty much. Embrace transparency, adhere to international law, maybe even partner with Western companies to build trust.
That's a huge shift from what they're doing now. Can they even do that?
It's hard to say. Their system is built on control and central power.
Transparency and collaboration would be a big change.
It would. It'll be interesting to see if they're willing to change or if they'll double down and risk further isolation.
It's a crucial moment for them.
It is. Their choices now will have major consequences, not just for China, but for the entire world.
We're at a crossroads.
We are. The old rules are being challenged, and the outcome is totally uncertain.
And this uncertainty raises some big questions about the future.
Like what?
Are we heading towards a more divided world, with the U.S. and China leading separate blocs, each with its own set of rules?
That's a possibility, but it could lead to instability and conflict.
Is there another path, one that leads to cooperation and a more stable world order?
There's always hope. One possibility is a multipolar world.
What's that?
Where power is more evenly distributed among multiple centers of influence.
Interesting. That will be different from the U.S. being the dominant superpower.
Exactly. And it might be a more stable model in the long run.
How so?
It would prevent any one country from having too much power.
So this Panama Canal issue, it's given us a glimpse into a much bigger transformation.
It has. Shifting power, rising tensions, and questions about how we navigate this new world.
It's a lot to process, but I'm starting to see how important this is.
Yeah.
This isn't just about ships and a canal.
Right.
It's about the future of trade, international relations, and the kind of world we want to live in.
And that brings us back to our listeners.
Why should they care about this? It's happening so far away.
It's easy to feel disconnected from these events, but they affect all of us.
Even if we don't realize it.
The prices we pay, the stability of our economies, even our access to information, it's all connected to these global relationships.
So it's not just some political drama on TV. It affects our everyday lives.
It does. And as this situation develops, we all need to stay informed and consider the consequences of the choices being made.
By our leaders and by ourselves.
Right. It's a reminder that we're not just watching this happen. We have a role to play.
Even if it's a small one.
In shaping the future. And understanding situations like the Panama Canal is crucial to becoming active and informed participants.
It's a call to action.
It is. Sometimes the most important lessons come from unexpected places. Speaking of unexpected places, there's a connection between the Panama Canal and what's happening with TikTok.
Oh, you're right. There are some similarities.
Both situations show a key tactic the U.S. is using, leveraging their legal and financial systems to put pressure on China.
In TikTok's case, it was the threat of a ban and huge fines.
Yeah, it forced them to consider selling off part of the company.
It's similar to the pressure on Hutchison ports in Panama.
Exactly. It's about using economic and legal power to achieve political goals.
And it's not just limited to tech companies anymore.
Right, it's spreading to other sectors like shipping and infrastructure.
It's a way for the U.S. to push back against China.
It is. They're saying if you want to operate globally, you have to play by their rules.
It's a pretty bold move.
Hmm.
But how effective will it be in the long run? Can they really contain China this way?
That's the big question. China is a powerful force, and they've shown they'll fight back.
We saw that with Google and Apple.
Exactly. So it's a dangerous game both sides are playing, testing each other.
It feels like the whole world's watching to see who gives in first.
And it's not just the U.S. and China involved. Other countries and organizations are caught in the middle.
They'll have a big impact on how this plays out.
They will. Some will side with the U.S., others with China.
And then there's the battle for public opinion.
Oh, that's huge. It's not just about economics and laws. It's about winning hearts and minds.
It's a propaganda war.
It is. China's been investing a lot in its global media presence, pushing their narrative.
Try to counter what they see as Western bias.
Exactly. It's a battle to control the story of the 21st century.
And both sides are using different tactics.
China has state-run media, and they've been accused of using social media to spread disinformation.
The U.S. is pushing their own message, too, about human rights and freedom.
It's a complex struggle, and no one knows how it will end. But the choices we make today will have a huge impact on tomorrow.
So what can we do? It's easy to feel powerless in the face of these global issues.
I understand. But even small things matter. Staying informed, talking to others, supporting organizations that promote democracy and human rights, those things make a difference.
It's a reminder that we have a voice.
We do. We have a choice and a responsibility to shape the future.
And that's a key takeaway from today.
The world is changing, the balance of power is shifting, and our choices matter.
It's daunting, but also empowering. We can help create the future.
We can, so let's make good choices and build a better world. It's like they're playing by a different set of rules and everyone's noticing.
It's making them look bad, isn't
Yeah,
it?
it is. It undermines their credibility. And, this brings us to a really important distinction that often gets missed.
Okay, tell me more.
It's the difference between owning land and just having the right to manage it.
I'm not sure I follow.
Okay, think about it like this. China, through Hutchison ports, they can manage those ports in Panama,
Right, we talked about that.
but they don't actually own the land itself.
So it's not really theirs.
It's not, it's like those historical examples, like when Britain managed the Suez Canal or Cyprus, control, but not true ownership.
I see what you mean.
So China's position in Panama, it's not as secure as it might seem at first glance.
Because they could lose those management rights?
Exactly, they're vulnerable. And this vulnerability, it's not just limited to Panama.
You're thinking about the South China Sea.
I am. They're making claims there, but they don't actually own a lot of those strategically important locations.
So their claims are weak.
They are, legally speaking.
Right.
And the U.S., by focusing on these legal aspects, they're playing a smart game.
They're thinking long term.
They are. They're using international law to their advantage, exposing China's vulnerabilities and challenging their actions.
It's like they're using the rule book to outmaneuver China.
Exactly. And this leads us to a broader discussion about some fundamental weaknesses in China's system.
Okay, let's dig into that.
These weaknesses become more apparent as China tries to grow its global influence because their system clashes with how the rest of the world operates.
So what are some of these weaknesses you're talking about?
Well, one major issue is their economic fragility. They've had amazing growth, but it's been very dependent on exports.
And access to Western markets.
Exactly. They need those markets to keep their economy going. But as tensions with the U.S. rise, we're seeing those markets become less accessible.
Through tariffs and trade restrictions.
Right. And those measures directly impact China's economic engine. This Panama Canal situation could make things even worse for them.
How so?
If the U.S. succeeds in pushing back against Hutchison ports, it could show other countries that doing business with China might be risky.
That China's grip on these strategic assets isn't as strong as they claim.
Exactly. Other countries might become more hesitant to enter into deals with China, knowing that those deals could become targets.
Because of U.S. pressure.
Exactly.
But what's China's perspective on all of this? What are they ultimately trying to achieve, and how are they adapting to this pushback from the West?
That's a great question. Their strategy so far seems to be focused on gaining control over key infrastructure.
Like ports and transportation hubs.
Exactly. They want to project their power and influence globally. But as we've seen, that strategy might not be working as well as they hoped.
They're running into roadblocks.
They are, and that raises a crucial question. If their current approach is flawed, what other options do they have? How can they adapt to this changing world and still achieve their goals?
What are their options?
One option is to shift their focus from just controlling things to actually owning them.
You mean like buying these strategic assets outright?
Exactly. Instead of just managing ports and canals, they could try to acquire them completely.
But wouldn't that be incredibly difficult? How could they realistically buy up these kinds of assets in other countries?
It would require a major shift in their approach. They'd have to move away from those opaque deals and the practice of leveraging debt to gain influence.
So they'd have to become more transparent, play by the rules.
Exactly. They'd need to embrace transparency, adhere to international legal norms, and even consider partnering with Western companies to build trust.
That sounds like a huge departure from their current approach.
It would be a major change. The question is, can they actually do it? Their system is based on control and centralized power.
Transparency and collaboration would be a big departure for them.
It would, so it'll be interesting to see what they do. Do they try to change, or do they double down and risk becoming even more isolated? It's a critical moment.
Their decisions now will have huge consequences for everyone.
They will. For China, for the U.S., for the whole world.
It feels like we're watching a major turning point in history.
We are. The old rules are being rewritten, and nobody knows what the new ones will be.
It's both exciting and scary.
It is. There's a lot of uncertainty, but also a lot of potential for change.
So this Panama Canal situation, it's given us a glimpse into a much bigger transformation.
It has. It's a microcosm of the shifting balance of power, the growing tensions between superpowers, and the fundamental questions we're facing about how to navigate this new global landscape.
It's a lot to take in,
It is, but it's important to understand these dynamics because they affect us all.
even if we don't see it directly.
Exactly. The prices we pay for goods, the stability of our economies, even our access to information and technology, these things are all shaped by the relationships between countries.
So what's happening in Panama, it's not just some abstract political drama.
It's a story that's playing out in our lives, in our wallets, in the very fabric of our daily existence.
And as the story continues, it's important to stay informed and engaged, to think critically about the choices being made by our leaders and by ourselves.
Exactly. It's a reminder that we're not just passive observers in this global drama. We have a role to play, however small, in shaping the future we want to see.
It's a call to action, disguised as a deep dive into a seemingly obscure geopolitical event.
Precisely. Sometimes the most profound insights come from unexpected places. And speaking of unexpected places, have you noticed any similarities between what's happening in Panama and the recent events surrounding TikTok?
Now that you mention it, there's some striking parallels.
Right. Both situations highlight a key tactic being used by the U.S.
Using their legal and financial systems to pressure China.
Exactly. In TikTok's case, it was the threat of a ban and those massive fines that got their attention.
It forced them to consider drastic measures, like potentially selling off part of the company.
It's a similar dynamic to what we're seeing with Hutchison Ports in Panama, applying pressure to achieve political objectives.
So the U.S. is using its economic and legal power to influence China's actions.
Precisely. They're recognizing that even these large Chinese companies with a global presence are still vulnerable within the U.S. system.
And they're using that vulnerability to their advantage.
They are. It's a way for the U.S. to assert its influence and push back against practices they see as unfair or threatening to their interests.
So they're basically saying, if you want to play in the global arena, you have to play by our rules.
Exactly. And it's not just limited to tech companies anymore.
It's spreading to other sectors, like shipping and infrastructure, with those legal challenges targeting Hutchison Ports in Panama.
It's a clear signal from the U.S. They're willing to use their system as leverage to protect their interests and shape the global landscape.
Yeah, it's like a power play, using their system as leverage. But is it sustainable? Can they really contain China's ambitions just by using legal and economic pressure?
That's the million-dollar question. China is a major player on the world stage, economically and politically.
And they're not afraid to push back.
We've already seen that with those antitrust investigations into Google and Apple. They're willing to use their own power to counter U.S. actions.
It's a high-stakes game.
It is. Both sides are pushing the limits, trying to figure out how far they can go without causing a major crisis.
It's like everyone's holding their breath, waiting to see what happens next.
And it's not just a two-player game, you know?
Right, there are other countries and organizations caught in the crossfire.
Exactly. Their actions will play a big role in how this power struggle unfolds. Some might align themselves with the U.S.,
Others might side with China.
and then there's the battle for public opinion, which is just as important as the economic and legal battles.
It's all about shaping the narrative, controlling the story.
Exactly. We're seeing a full-blown propaganda war taking place. China's been investing heavily in its global media presence, trying to promote its own version of events.
And counter what they see as Western bias.
Exactly. It's a battle for hearts and minds, a struggle to define this era.
And both sides are using a lot of different tactics. China has its state-run media outlets, and they've also been accused of using social media to spread disinformation and manipulate public opinion.
And the U.S. has its own messaging, focusing on human rights, freedom of speech, and the challenges posed by China's authoritarian system.
It's a messy, complex situation.
It is, and there's no easy answer. But one thing is clear. The choices we make today, both as individuals and as a global community, will have a huge impact on the world we create for tomorrow.
So what can we do? It's easy to feel overwhelmed by these huge global challenges, like we're just tiny specks in a vast and complex system.
I understand that feeling, but even small actions can make a difference. Staying informed, having conversations about these issues, supporting organizations that align with our values, these things matter.
It's a reminder that we're not powerless.
We have a voice, a choice, and a responsibility to shape the future we want to see. And that's really the key takeaway from our deep dive today.
The world is changing, the balance of power is shifting, and we're all part of this transformation.
It's a bit daunting, but it's also an opportunity. The future isn't set in stone. We can help create it.
So let's be thoughtful, let's make informed choices, and let's work together to build a better world.
Well said. And on that note, this has been a fascinating deep dive.
It has. Thanks for joining me, and thanks to all of you listening out there. Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and stay hopeful.